New horrifying discoveries on Mount Everest. Everest is the highest mountain on the planet. Its height is 29,000 feet above sea level. Every year, hundreds of climbers, tourists, and adventurers strive to reach its summit, despite all the challenges and dangers that await on the way. Today, I will tell you about the latest discoveries on Mount Everest that have shocked all scientists. Let's go. The long-awaited find. Everest is surrounded by many mysteries and stories. One of the most enigmatic concerns who first reached the summit. Some claim it was George Mallory and Andrew Irvine. Their ascent took place in 1924, almost 3 decades before the famous climb of Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay in 1953. The British began their ascent in June 1924. On the 6th, they left the base camp at an altitude of 26,504 feet. They were last seen on June 8th, just 787 feet from the summit. After that, the climbers' traces disappeared, and their fate remained unknown. Mallory's remains were only discovered in 1999, but in 1933 an ice axe was found on the mountain, which possibly belonged to Irvine. In 2024, a National Geographic film crew working on a movie about Everest made a chilling discovery. They were passing through the Rongbuk Glacier, which was first explored by Mallory, accompanied by Irvine. The 1924 expedition also ascended via the same route. During the filming, the documentarians found an oxygen tank labeled 1933, which became a key to uncovering Irvine's location. Soon they stumbled upon a boot with remnants of a leg. One of the researchers, Jimmy Chin, pulled on the sock and discovered a patch with the initials Eco Irvine. This find became important evidence that the climber could indeed be Irvine. His full name was Andrew Coleman Irvine. Along with the boot, they also found ravens circling nearby, which added to the strangeness of the situation. Subsequently, the documentarians, having received permission from the authorities, brought down the remains and took a DNA sample for verification. The analysis confirmed that the part of the leg once belonged to Irvine. At the same time, an equally important question remains whether Mallory and Irvine reached the summit of Everest. If they indeed did, they would have been the first people to conquer the highest point on Earth. The 1996 tragedy. The tragedy on Everest in 1996 still sparks heated debates and discussions. In that fateful year, 2 commercial groups, Mountain Madness and Adventure Consultants, consisting of 30 people, including 6 top-notch guides, 8 Sherpas, and 16 clients, began their assault on the summit under the leadership of American Scott Fisher and New Zealander Rob Hall. The ascent began before dawn on May 10th, but encountered problems almost immediately. The main cause of the delays was that the Sherpas had not managed to set up the fixed ropes necessary for a safe climb. This led to long stops at critical sections of the route. Anatoly Bukreev, an experienced guide, was the first to reach the summit of Everest that day. Following him, John Krakauer, a client of Hall's group, and adventure consultants guide Andrew Morris reached the summit. Next, guide Neil Beidelman and Fisher's client Martin Adams reached the summit. By 2 p.m., when it was necessary to start the descent, many of the clients had not yet reached the summit. Bukreev, understanding the seriousness of the situation, began descending to Camp 4 to meet the tourists who were late in reaching the summit. At this time, the weather began to deteriorate. By evening, when it got dark and the weather became increasingly harsh, several clients, including Scott Fisher himself, were still at the summit, having not yet started their descent. Anatoly Bukreev showed remarkable courage and selflessness. After providing first aid to several climbers who managed to descend from the summit, taking oxygen tanks, he set out again up the mountain. At the risk of his own life, he managed to find 3 clients from Scott Fisher's group, as well as Yasuko Namba from Rob Hall's team. In the darkness and severe weather, Bukreev was able to bring 1 climber to the camp first, and then the other 2. However, when he tried to help the woman who had lost consciousness, he no longer had the strength to save her. The next day, Bukreev found Scott Fisher, but he was already dead. He also found Rob Hall, who did not survive the descent, remaining in the mountains with 2 clients. Despite his heroic efforts, Bukreev faced harsh criticism. His actions were condemned, even though he risked his life to save those who could still survive. A year later, in 1997, Anatoly Bukreev died in the mountains under an avalanche. Green boots. The tragedy that occurred on Everest in 1996 affected not only commercial expeditions but also military climbing groups, such as the Indian expedition that was ascending the North Face. The Indian climbers began their ascent only at 8 in the morning. For such a climb, this was too late. According to the plan, they were supposed to return by 3 p.m., regardless of whether they reached the summit. However, this did not happen. 2. 3 members of the group reported that they had reached the summit and were beginning their descent, but due to a severe storm, exhaustion, and the onset of darkness, they were unable to return to the assault camp. They remained at altitude without tents, food, and oxygen. The next day, despite the ongoing bad weather, the Japanese expedition went for the summit assault, but what happened during their ascent became the subject of heated discussions and condemnation. The Japanese, passing by the dying climbers, did not offer them any help. Neither oxygen nor hot tea to warm them. Upon their return, they justified themselves by saying that their goal was to reach the summit at any cost, and at an altitude of over 26,000 feet, 8,000 meters. It was too difficult for them to provide assistance. In their eyes, this was not a place for morality. One of the tragic symbols of this incident was the body of the Indian climber Tsewang Palger, who perished while waiting for help. His body remained on the route, and the green boots became a landmark for other climbers. Despite several attempts, removing the body and laying it to rest has not yet been successful, due to the enormous risks associated with the altitude and extreme conditions. Sleeping Beauty. The tragic story of Francis Di Stefano and Sergei Arsenyev, who attempted to conquer Everest. In 1998, it became one of the most bitter pages in the history of mountaineering. Francis's ambition to become the first American woman to climb Everest without oxygen, as well as the couple's desire to ascend in the purest style possible, without using supplemental oxygen, ultimately played a cruel trick on them. The couple reached the summit, but the consequences of spending 3 days at an altitude of nearly 27,000 feet waiting for a weather window proved fatal. These nights gradually sapped their strength, and despite standing on the summit, only at the beginning of the 7th evening, they were unable to descend back. By the 4th night, they found themselves in extreme conditions. Without tents, stoves, food, and sleeping bags. Unexpectedly for both, on a short stretch of the path, they lost each other, and Francis, finding herself alone, spent another night in a semi-conscious state. Although other climbers passed by and tried to encourage her, she was too weak to move. She could not be saved, and for 9 years her body remained on the route, until members of a special expedition found her, wrapped her body in an American flag, and lowered it down the sheer wall. Sergei Arsenyev, who was no less experienced a climber, also perished, but his body was found only a year later. His death remained shrouded in mystery, as the circumstances of his demise have never been fully revealed. Drawings in the snow. Everest shocks not only with its extreme conditions and the large number of corpses. At its summit, things happen that defy even the most brilliant scientific minds. One such example is the claim by Italian climber Reinhold Messner, who in 1980, during his ascent of Everest, felt something unimaginable. Messner claimed that at an altitude of 26,250 feet, he sensed the presence of an unknown ally, as if someone invisible was helping him, guiding and supporting him in moments of extreme fatigue and despair. This unusual experience, it impressed him so much that he spoke about it in interviews and books. Not only Messner, but other climbers who have faced the unimaginable also confirm mysterious occurrences on Everest. In 1975, British climbers Dougal Haston and Doug Scott claimed that during their expedition, they felt the presence of ghosts who seemed to offer them help. Sherpa Pembo George in 2004 recounted encountering spirits in the form of black shadows gliding over the snowy slopes. Many believe that these ghosts could be the souls of those who perished on Everest, remaining in the mountain conditions without a proper burial. In such conditions, where death and life are closely intertwined, the spirits of deceased climbers are supposedly doomed to wander the mountain, unable to find peace, in search of their final rest. The Climber's Diary. The story of Maurice Wilson is one of the strangest and most tragic in the history of mountaineering. In 1934, this English adventurer decided to conquer Everest, despite having absolutely insufficient experience in mountaineering. Wilson had a lot of faith in himself, but few actual skills. He didn't even know how to fly a plane, yet he planned to use an old aircraft to cover most of the journey to the mountain. Of course, his plan didn't work, and he continued the ascent on foot. In his second attempt, Wilson astonishingly reached an altitude of 21,000 feet, which was a real feat for an unprepared climber. However, his Sherpas, concerned about the danger, refused to continue and urged him to descend. But Wilson, full of determination, ignored them and continued the ascent alone, despite the conditions that were already extremely dangerous. The last entry in his diary read, "Magnificent day. Onward." It looks like a farewell full of optimism, but also a foreshadowing of his tragic fate. Wilson did not return home. His body was found a year later. Nearby, his diary was discovered, which left a unique mark in the history of attempts to conquer Everest. Tons of trash. It's difficult to determine exactly how much trash has accumulated on Everest over all the years of its climbing, but it includes everything from old tents and broken tools to plastic wrappers, empty oxygen canisters, and even cutlery. This enormous amount of waste cluttering one of the world's highest peaks continues to shock and cause concern. Everest is gradually turning into the largest landfill on the planet. However, in recent years, efforts have been made to address this environmental issue. Since 2014, strict measures have been implemented for climbers. Now they are required to take at least 8 pounds of trash with them during their descent. Otherwise, they risk losing a $4,000 deposit, which was established to encourage climbers to be more environmentally responsible. Toilet at the summit. When climbers on Everest face the need to relieve themselves, it's important to remember that this is not a place for making a mess. It is required to dig a hole in the snow in advance to minimize the environmental impact. Each season, up to thousands of pounds of human waste are left on the mountain. In the base camp, waste is disposed of, but above this level, the situation is significantly worse. At higher altitudes, waste accumulates, leading to severe pollution of water sources. This increases the risk of disease spread, making the problem extremely serious. In 2015, the president of the Nepal Mountaineering Association expressed concern that the level of human waste on Everest had become critical. This situation requires immediate intervention, as each year the amount of trash and pollution on the mountain only increases. Marine fossils. Despite the pollution, one surprising discovery was made at the summit of Everest. The remains of marine creatures are surprising, but they are a clear testament to how tectonic processes change the Earth's surface. These fossils, which are over 400 million years old, are found in sedimentary limestone, a rock that forms exclusively on the sea floor. This means that Everest and the Himalayas were once underwater. In particular, among the found remains are marine animals such as trilobites, brachiopods, and ostracods, which lived during the Ordovician period when life in the oceans thrived. These organisms were among the first complex creatures on the planet. Nevertheless, the discovery of marine remains on Everest does not support the theories of a great flood, as is sometimes claimed in myths. Science explains this phenomenon through the movement of continental plates. The Himalayas and Everest were formed as a result of the collision between the Indian and Eurasian plates, which began around about 40 to 50 million years ago. The process of these plates rising led to sedimentary rocks, which previously lay at the bottom of the sea, being found at great heights, along with the fossils of marine creatures. The Himalayan jumping spider. On Everest, one can find not only traces of human activity, but also remarkable representatives of the fauna. One of such unique inhabitants of the mountain is the jumping spider. These insects have been observed at altitudes ranging from 19,000 to 26,000 feet. What makes them true mountaineers among arthropods? They have not only adapted to extreme conditions but have also learned to use webs and opposing wind currents to move between peaks. Spiders from the Salticity family do not suffer from oxygen deprivation, do not freeze in the cold, and can enter a state of anabiosis if conditions become too harsh. These small creatures, which grow to less than half an inch in length, possess high agility and advanced intelligence. They are capable of complex communication using signals and have an excellent ability to distinguish colors, which makes them even more interesting to scientists. The number of tourists aiming to conquer Everest increases every year, which in turn puts more strain on the region's ecology. Despite this, for many, the aspiration to conquer Everest remains a dream, albeit with high risks and costs. They are not deterred by those who decide to take this path. Everyone decides for themselves if it's worth it. Well, friends, I want to make you an interesting offer. You have a unique opportunity to become part of our team. If you have video editing skills, can voice over videos in Russian, English, and other languages, or write interesting scripts, we would be happy to work with you. Message our Telegram bot. The link is in the description. That's all for today. Thank you for watching.